Welcome to the Roo Code podcast. I'm your host, Hannes Rudolph, the community manager of Roo Code. Joining me today are my co-hosts. Oh, look at that. I'm streaming myself, echoing. Okay, joining me today are my co-hosts, Roo Code founders, Matt and Danny, and our special guest, Logan from Google DeepMind. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here.
Hey, folks. Happy Wednesday.
So Logan, for listeners who may not know who you are, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and, what's your role at DeepMind?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm excited for this conversation. Big fans of what you all are building. So excited to chat. I lead our developer product team at DeepMind, responsible for AI Studio, which is our developer platform. Now supports vibe coding, which is exciting, and our underlying sort of APIs for all of our latest models and services. So things like Gemini, VO, Imagine, etc.
Okay, cool. You all have been launching a lot of stuff this week. I saw. I'd love to hear a little more about the most recent one, the AI Studio, if you're willing to talk about that. And I don't know if you're set up to demo, but I'd love to see it a little bit as well.
Yeah, let's do it. Let me share my screen live and we can see if
this guy comes prepared.
Well, it's easy to demo. So we just landed this brand new sort of vibe coding experience, which I'm really excited about. I think I'll say this with all the normal caveats that I think vibe coding is overloaded and there's lots of different products and it means different things to different people. But the sort of thesis for us is we think building software is extremely powerful. And particularly, I think we see a ton of interest and traction in building software that's actually AI powered. So again, because our team's responsible for both this UI product, but also all the underlying APIs that developers use to build AI powered experiences. There's this interesting fusion of those two things coming together. And I think that's this experience that we're building here. So we're going to help people build AI powered apps, make it super easy to do. And hopefully it should be literally as easy as coming here and clicking this "I'm feeling lucky" button. And then we have this a bunch of suggested prompts and different AI capabilities as well. So this one that I clicked is creating an app that allows me to upload any document and build out a meeting agenda from it. Then create a meeting in the timeline view. We're going to use Shadcn for styling, a clean panel on the left for uploads. This is really cool. The fun thing is that you can just really quickly also add additional AI capabilities. So we have this grounding with Google search functionality. So I'm going to add that in as well. And then we can actually kick off building this app. And then you get even more things, which is AI suggested next steps. So I can add potentially the ability to easily add, manage, assign roles to different meeting stakeholders, which can be linked to meeting agenda items. You can go and deploy, you can share, you can move it to GitHub. The experience is free, but if you want to use certain premium models and stuff like that, you can actually switch to one of your API keys if you want. I'm removing the friction for people to build is so exciting. And I just saw on the timeline yesterday, just all of these great examples of people building cool new stuff. Happy to keep jamming, but I'm excited to see what this builds for us.
I love the renewed relevance of the "I'm feeling lucky" button. We talk a lot here about wanting to one shot and man, is that a brand for one shot right there?
Yeah, you know what's funny is maybe I don't mean to be overly critical of search, but it is interesting that I don't personally find that "I'm feeling lucky" button in search to be useful at all, because it still requires that you put in the search term and something like that. And I guess it is. I'm actually curious. I don't know what the data is. Maybe people get a ton of value out of it, but I've never I never clicked that button.
I've never used it.
It's more. I always saw "I'm feeling lucky" as bragging rights for Google. It's our results are so good, you'll probably think number one is really great. And so in a vibe coding world, I think we talk a lot about how we can get a prompt to one shot correctly do as gigantic a task as possible. And "I'm feeling lucky" is just the manifestation of that to me. It's really cool.
I love that. That's actually a great reminder. So now it's our bragging rights, hopefully, that we'll have models that are good enough to just build you a really cool AI product off the bat. But yeah, it feels, it'll be, again, this is very new, so it'll be interesting to see what the data looks like of like how much do people actually just like want to let the model come up with some cool idea for some product for them to build versus like how much handcrafting do they want. But we got our generation. I'll just note a couple of things. This is, I spend a lot of time with folks who are sort of new to this vibe coding experience. I think your audience is probably like much more deeply technical, but I always like to make my disclaimer that like whatever the model puts together is the starting place. Even if it's like slightly broken or it doesn't have the features that you want, you can continue to iterate, and that's the magic of this. And also like this prompt that we were using is like not sophisticated. So like I didn't really specify a whole lot of the detail of what I wanted. I could have even put in like an image with sort of a UI and stuff like that, but I'm just going to make up an agenda. So the agenda for this podcast is, intros, show AI Studio, the app a little, cool Roo Code stuff. We love AI. And we'll see what this actually puts together. I have no idea. But the fun thing is, if it doesn't work, we get to continue to iterate real live. Well, I'll make one other quick example. One of the things that I love most about this UI experience is like, again, from a developer point of view, sometimes like I'm not a TypeScript developer, and it is helpful for me to like start building my mental model of what's happening in TypeScript when I hover over any of these files and it's telling me that like the file upload panel.tsx creates a left panel component from the user input, it includes a text area, et cetera, et cetera. So I can like sort of roughly understand how what I'm seeing on my screen is actually mapping to the underlying code files without actually having to go and look at the code. You can look at the code if you want. You can open up the editor. You can like change whatever you want. But by default, you don't have to. And actually, I just lost my beautiful agenda because it reloads when you look at the code in case you made any changes. So, but yeah, I think the experience is super interesting. So yeah, happy to riff in any direction. We also have this, I won't show my apps, but we have this great gallery that is sort of showcasing all these different capabilities. So if you're like, I want to build a video gen app, or I want to build something with, the grounding with Google Maps feature or Nano Banana, or all those different things are possible. And again, the fun part is you can actually directly like change and manipulate them. This one's really cool where you can take a picture of a product and then like drag to insert it into a specific place in a scene. So let me actually see if I can put in a goofy scene. This one I will have to note. Nano Banana made this for me earlier today for a YouTube thumbnail, which is a little bit goofy. So I acknowledge that, but then I'll take the Gemini logo and I'll put this in, and then it should be able to just drag in, and I'll put the Gemini logo right there. And then it'll use Nano Banana to fuse these two things together. And this example was like completely vibe coded by somebody on my team, which is awesome. And I think it just like showcases how, almost got it perfectly right. So very, very cool to see this come together. And again, if you want to see like under the hood, what's happening, how did it go from me dragging? I think it's like coordinate based. You can actually read through the code and sort of figure it out, or ask Gemini to explain how it's making that piece possible.
Can we connect this to our GitHub repos?
Yes. So right now we have, you could save to GitHub. So you could go and like actually migrate the code there. It doesn't work right now. At least you can't take an existing GitHub repo, bring it in, and then like do the iteration. I think we think about like this experience as a starting place for people. And like, if you're a sophisticated developer who's using GitHub already and you're sort of saving your code and you're building there, I think the hypothesis right now is it's unlikely that there's lots of great developer tools out there that like go a lot deeper than what we'll be able to offer. So really this is the sort of top of funnel experience.
So we can think of this as like a prototyping environment first. For those of you who are going to have to implement something that a designer or a product manager had in their mind first, like a working prototype is better than a spec.
100%.
So here it is.
Yeah. And I think, there are very like thin use cases. And I think this is also like tied to the model story as well. Like hopefully, eventually maybe the models will be good enough where they'll really be building full product for people. I don't think that's the case right now. Like this home canvas one is a good example of something that I think just like works out of the box, and like you could have like a very like micro SaaS product around something like this. But it's definitely like there's limitations everywhere. And I think that like this is the power of being a developer and having sort of like really, really powerful bespoke tools, is that you can sort of go the 5 levels deeper and really sort of like make the nuance of the experience incredible, which is not the sort of experience that we're going after right now. Really just like get you to that aha moment as quickly as possible. You can build this thing with AI and then sort of potentially get you into another product that's a little bit deeper that allows you to continue to build if you want to.
Are you actually using things like this day to day as a product leader to prototype?
Yeah, this is the fun thing. So I don't have these demos because they're all a bunch of internal ones. But we actually, so that feature that we were looking at when we're building, which allows you to like click through different options and suggestions, was initially prototyped in AI Studio. The entire like revamped overall design experience was prototyped in AI Studio. Like we prototyped AI Studio in AI Studio. We have full stack runtime supports coming, which is really exciting. So we have an even deeper version of this that allows us to like quickly iterate. So it does make that cost of like, hey, I have some random feature idea that I would love to sort of like see what it would look like. The cost of bringing that into reality and like putting my fingers on it is really nice. And I think like, and I'm sure others have had this experience, like our engineering counterparts, it's like way easier to show up with something like a prototype like this and be like, hey, here's what I'm thinking. And there's like much less guesswork in that, because you have like a PRD or a product spec is such a lossy representation of, I think, what actually ends up being built. So it's super exciting. I think.
And it forces design and product to think through the experience edge cases that aren't evident on a mock, which is always kind of my pet peeve.
100%. And you just end up doing a bunch of guesswork, and then people are surprised when the guesswork that other people are doing doesn't actually connect with the guesswork that they were doing in their head.
Right.
So I think you save a lot of that sort of back and forth by just being able to like actually bring the thing to life. So yeah, it's been immensely helpful for us. And I think broadly, this is something that gets me really excited for Google in general, which is like being able to, we have a huge amount of like internal teams that are using this to prototype next generation experiences across all of Google. And I think we're just scratching the surface of like accelerating the product development for all of Google, which is going to be really magical.
As you think about the roadmap for Google assisting software development overall, both internally and externally, like, so it seems like I think I understand where this fits in on sort of the broader life cycle of software development. Like, what else is on the roadmap that, to the extent that you can talk about that we'd love to know.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting things for Google is like there's so many places in which we show up in so many different ecosystems. And I think this work is like obviously just like one of many places. Like we're obviously showing up in a completely different way for like Android developers and for web developers with Chrome and everything that's happening there. So I think and maybe this is like an overly generic answer, but I think it has like a really interesting thread to pull on, which is historically, as you looked at that portfolio of things that Google had from a sort of developer ecosystem offering, they were all actually extremely disconnected. Like the Android developer didn't have a lot of crossover with the web developer, which didn't have a lot of crossover with, the person using TensorFlow or some other product that's in Google's sort of ecosystem of offerings. And now the exciting piece is you actually have Gemini bringing these things together. Like Gemini is this through line in which as a user, as a developer, you're sort of connected to all of these tools. And you start to see things like, with the Gemini CLI and how the CLI is sort of showing up on more of Google's developer surfaces. And I don't know off the top of my head whether it's integrated as part of Android Studio, but I think it's like becoming more and more integrated. Like if there's a terminal available, there's an option to use the Gemini CLI as part of that to help with code development. And then also like they're, available as part of like Google subscription offering so that you can sort of have a single subscription ideally and like be able to use that Gemini capability across the breadth of Google's developer products and not sort of have this isolated fragmented experience. So Yeah, and obviously the models, like coding from a model perspective is extremely important. So like very top of mind, like something that we want to hill climb on. I think it's like very clear that if you have a great coding model, like there's a massive amount of unlock for the world in that. So lots of effort on that, lots of progress already, and hopefully more progress soon.
So when we think about Gemini and the road ahead, and particularly like why Gemini wins and why the Google developer ecosystem wins overall, is it that through line that is the secret sauce there? Or are there other ways that we should think about like the way that the ecosystem is stronger and ultimately wins?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the, and this is one of the interesting parts about like what it means for Google to win in developer. So much of the story is like, and I think about this all the time, is like, how do we meet developers where they actually are? The reality is you're probably using 50 tools that have nothing to do with Google, and like will never have nothing to do with Google. And like, it's a great opportunity for us to still have a touch point, still be able to create value for developers in those ecosystems. And I think that's why this like really strong Gemini coding model showing up in like third-party developer tools where code and software creation is actually happening is really important for us strategically, versus like, you know, making our own product and like solely reserving a new Gemini model to be available in that type of product. So being in the ecosystem matters a lot. I think that's a core part of how we think about like the positive outcome of this technology. But separately, I think there's also something interesting, which is coding is obviously really important to developers, but there's like these 10 other things that all these like really interesting emerging use cases around multimodal, around sort of like real-time interactive experiences. And I think we don't want to like just having a great coding model isn't enough for us to, I think, like do the things that we want to do. We need to have the sort of like frontier experiences and like be state of the art in those frontier experiences that developers are trying to build. And I think like the two great examples of this are computer use models and the whole computer use agent space, and then voice and like real-time interactive stuff. And I think with voice agents and all that. So two use cases that are top of mind where we're like trying to push the rock up the hill from a model perspective and product perspective.
And how can we at Roo Code, and I mean the royal we of both the company, but also the community, many of whom are tuned in at the moment. How can we help you? How can we be part of why Gemini wins?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think we have been partnering with you all, which has been awesome. So would love feedback on new models and all that are coming out. Would love also ways of like, there's something interesting around this like flywheel of like what doesn't work well, and like how we can sort of like, I care deeply about, and I love reading, not because I don't like things, not because I like seeing things that don't work, but because I like knowing what developers are having problems with so that we can actually go and hill climb on those things. So I think that's very top of mind, which is like, as a developer, what are the things that you're trying to do today that just like aren't possible or don't work well or aren't reliable enough for like you to really lean on the models or like lean on these different ecosystems. And I would love that feedback and signal so that we can make sure that it's stuff that we're prioritizing as we're thinking about what does the next generation of these models look like, what are the API features we should be building, et cetera. Because yeah, I think the promise is like there's so many things that are hard about building software, and ideally we sort of make some of those things easier so that you don't have to smash your head against the wall more than you already do. And I think in actually some cases, like, you know, AI is great and super powerful, but there are edge cases where you definitely have to smash your head against the wall more than you perhaps were before, and that's the sort of wrong outcome in a lot of ways.
How much do you pay attention to the evals, you know, when you were talking about guiding how things, you know, evaluating how things are getting better? Are evals a big part of the way that you do that?
Yeah, evals are obviously super important. The challenge is it's a proxy of a proxy. And like, you know, even some of the best evals out there, and if you look specifically at coding evals as an example, like, you know, if you go in and spend the time, and this is why I'm like very hopeful that we'll get some like really great consolidated eval products platform, because it's really hard to keep up with all. There's like 50 different evals, and like based on the way that the wind is blowing one day, people care about one versus the other, and they say, oh, we discount that one because of these three things, and it's like I completely lose track of it.
Oh yeah.
So I'd love to have a platform that makes that easy and makes my life simpler. yeah, I think the fundamental question is always like, does that actually represent the work that developers are doing or what they're trying to do? And I spend a lot of time, like, what people are building with software is so varied that it's like, it's always like yes in certain cases, but like no in many cases as well. And it's just like hard to, I think even as a developer to know, like I was talking to someone today about like open source game engines and like whether the models were good at these different specific game engines. And I'm like, there's no way to know other than like somebody running the evals and like spending the like painstaking amount of time to make that happen. And I think it just makes it, if you're the developer who's in that situation and you're like trying to understand, should I be using these tools to try to accelerate the work that I'm doing? Like the bar of having to go and build evals to understand that answer to that question is actually really, really high. So I think there's something interesting there to figure out to make it easier for developers to try to answer that question for themselves.
We asked you. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, go ahead, Hannes.
We asked you about winning here, and that sort of moves on. How, from an outsider's perspective, how do you think a tool like Roo Code wins? How do we take off? Because right now we're I hate to say it, but we're an underdog in this race right now.
That's an understatement.
Under
There's
kangaroo.
a lot of interesting dimensions to this. I don't have, and we should have an offline conversation. I'd love to learn more about like what's sort of like top of mind strategically for you all. I think the way that I see it is, obviously there's a massive platform shift happening for like how software is being created. I think there's like no better time for disruption and for like net new players in the market to like really sort of like grab a piece of that experience than like when the technology evolution is happening, than when as developers right now, people are like more willing than ever to go and try these different experiences and like try new tools. And I think actually, if you look back 3 years ago, like my sort of sentiment was developers kind of didn't want that. They're like, hey, I've got great tools right now, sort of just like help me what I'm doing right now, do it better and faster. And there need to be a really high bar for me to like switch off of one of these existing platforms that I was using. And I think right now people are like, oh, new tool, like let me give it a shot and see whether or not it matters for me. I think there's some balance for you all to think about, or just for like anyone building a product to think about around like, how do you go after some of these frontier use cases that like don't really work that well today, versus, hey, we have this developer journey that sort of we can like really refine and polish and like make 2 to 5x better, but is also perhaps a journey that like lots of people are going after. And I think there's this like interesting tension between those two things, which is like, I think developers want to bet on products that are sort of going to be on the frontier of what's possible, because that way they ideally in the future potentially won't have to continue to switch tools every month. But they also like have a lot of like product experiences that they're using day in and day out, and they want those things to get better over time. And there's this thoughtfulness about like where AI fits in that story that I think like people are often on the one end of the spectrum where it's like, hey, we'll just throw AI at everything. And I don't actually think that solves people's problems in a lot of ways. So I think if you can nail the nuance of like when to use AI and when not to, and what are the right experiences that people care about, and that's a little hand wavy, but I think it's like no better time ever than to be competing against everyone in the developer space than right now, because of this shift that's happening and how much new product exploration can actually be done.
Yeah. No, Gemini has. I remember the first time I think I hit 70 million context after we with our sliding window. It was with Gemini 2.5 preview. It was just unbelievable. So we love what you guys have been doing and are excited about what you guys are going to be doing. People are pestering me endlessly in the chat. Ask them about Gemini 3, expecting that like you're going to be like, give us the answer.
It's coming.
Yeah, because he's going to come on the Roo Code podcast to announce it, right? This is obviously the place where a big announcement happens, right?
Exactly. That's what you have to do, though. That keep people on their toes. No, soon. I'm excited. I think the sort of positive vibes for Gemini 3 is really exciting. Like, I think it's also just like a great reflection of like, where were we a year and a half ago? Nobody really cared that much about the Gemini models, and sort of painstakingly earning the trust from the ecosystem and the excitement from the ecosystem about what we're doing. I think is like is a great reminder of just how quick the tide can turn in people's perception and usage of this stuff, which is cool.
We're stoked for it. So I think Matt has another question.
Yeah.
Hannes, you made a bunch of friends in the chat for that. So
the chat slowed down. I've been distracted.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who's been very deep in building Roo Code, one story that I've experienced and a lot of people over and over is you like solve some problem with your harness, and then the next week a model comes out that makes it all irrelevant. It's like a lot of people working on context condensing, and then there's a 1 million context window, and then 2 million. Like, do you have any thoughts or guidance on which direction, the models are going to be going, and which directions are going to be more open for harnesses and, things like Roo Code to provide value?
Yeah, this is a really tough question, because I think you're spot on. There's this like notion of the models sort of like eating the scaffolding as they sort of get smarter, which is like kind of what you want. Like, building scaffolding in some cases is really helpful and important. In some cases, like, it introduces like, you have to build the scaffolding. There's like a cost to actually doing it, and it's a trade-off against doing other stuff. And then there's this idea of like, where is the scaffolding frontier? And like, what are the things that these net new use cases you're trying to enable that aren't possible without all of this scaffolding work? It's tough to answer like precisely, Matt. I think that's my challenge. But I think like broadly, the model is becoming an agentic system out of the box. And like, I think in that, like, at least for Gemini models, it's worth thinking about sort of from our development perspective, like the breadth of where Google's models are actually showing up. Like, we aren't just making Gemini models specifically for the developer ecosystem. Like, the Gemini models are showing up across search and YouTube and, Google Workspace and in Gmail and, 10 other places. So we actually like, there's a lot of thought that goes into like, what are the trade-offs we're making on these different models, and specifically where versus like our 1P customers and our 3P customers and stuff like that. And like, again, like maybe this is too easy of an example, but like, if you're building a bunch of scaffolding for like Google Maps, it feels like it's an obvious case where like we have this really interesting experience. We have control of the Google Maps APIs, and like we then ship a feature like grounding with Google Search that makes it so that at the model level, at the API level, it's really, really easy to ground with both search, but also with maps without you having to like go and use some net new API. It's just built into the experience. I think another one, and sort of you were both alluding to this like long context story. I think long context is obviously something that's super exciting to us, and we've been at the forefront with 1 million token and 2 million token context windows, and have been also like now beyond it just like working for in like single retrieval examples, single needle retrieval examples. It's now sort of getting like much more robust, and like the model's actually able to like reason over everything that's in the context window. But I still think like, it would be great to have 100 million token context window model, even if it would be expensive and perhaps low. But I think those are the types of things that like actually require net new innovation. And in the meantime, like huge amount of alpha, if you can build great scaffolding that helps people do that. And I think we haven't really done, I think partially because the ecosystem has actually done a reasonable job of building some of the scaffolding. Like, we haven't thought about like trying to, could you augment Gemini in some way to like make it do 100 million token context, even if at the actual model level it's not able to do that. There's a lot of this that I think other folks are doing, and it's not something that we've been pushing on. But I think if the model natively could do it, then that's super exciting. And then you all can do 1 billion token scaffolding and solve those infrastructure challenges, which I'm sure would be extremely unique.
I used Flashlight Preview the other day to get up to 500 million in a chat, just repeating, stuffing the context to try to break
Half a
Roo.
billion?
Well, it kept condensing. So
Got it.
I kept condensing and refeeding it back to it, and it Flashlight just stayed on track. It did not miss a beat. It didn't start screwing up tool calls. It didn't start repeating itself like we've seen
That new
sometimes.
Flashlight model is actually really good. I don't know how much folks, just because the like timing was a little bit weird. It was like historically we release a bunch of models and then we do a standard stable release model and then we sort of move on to the next thing. But this model actually came out for Flashlight and Flash like after we had released the stable model, where most customers tend to end up sticking on the stable models. But they were like substantive improvements over the previous generation. So if you haven't tried, give the new Gemini Flash Latest and Gemini Flash Latest models a shot. They're pretty good.
They're pretty good. Yeah, absolutely. Matt, you were going to say something.
Well, I was going to say, like, I feel like we've gotten the context condensing working pretty well. So I'm going to enjoy the time that's still valuable before the models take over. But yeah, Hannes spends all day on this because it's like the dumbest things to stop you in AI, right? It's like how many R's are there in Strawberry? When does your editor gray screen? I think those are kind of the things that we've been running up against. And yeah, just crazy to push the limits there. We've made progress though. Hannes has been single-minded at trying to get rid of these gray screens, and $500 million. You really made it there.
Yeah, I did. One chat, it didn't crash once. It kept going. So,
but yeah, look, and I was going to respond a little bit about the frontier because it's been interesting, and we had Paige Bailey on last week. We talked about it a little bit too. Everyone's so excited for the next Gemini, but also like VO and Nano Banana. It does seem like a lot of these different modalities are interesting. The one thing that seemed hard, I don't know if you see this as well, is like getting teams actually using all this stuff. It kind of feels like the advancement stops when you have busy engineering teams who are, trying to ship stuff and trying to hit deadlines. And in my sense that the models are moving just way faster than the teams are. Do you experience that at all? And is that like part of what's behind like almost like evangelism through the AI studio and things like that? I guess I'm curious on the more human side of things, because it does feel, my instinct is that tools like Roo and harnesses, like actually focusing on that side of the problem is probably better than trying to outcompete the models on tokens and things like that.
Yeah, no, that's a super interesting push. I think this actually ties to this scaffolding frontier narrative perfectly, because I think what ends up happening is, especially for like somewhat larger teams, you end up like, you're like, hey, I want to build a product around the models right now. I have this problem that my users have. We want to solve it. We'll sort of take the most advanced thing that we have and we'll like do the normal thing, which is spend a bunch of engineering cycles to like actually make the experience work reliably enough that like customers are happy. And all the while that you're doing that, the frontier is moving on to the next thing. And actually, like I spent a bunch of time this year talking with customers and sort of business owners and developers who had sort of built the initial version of their product around sort of like the circa 2023, early 2024 LLM era. And I think the way, and I'm sure you all experienced this as well, but like the way of building around LLMs at that time was like completely different than how you would build right now. Because, the models are all multimodal by default. They have this reasoning capability by default. All the APIs are different and they're stateful, and there's a bunch of stuff happening server side, and there's, agents are working in some cases. So you end up like, the conversation was oftentimes like, hey, we have this product and like, we know it's not great and we want to keep evolving it, but we made all of this investment into like trying to like actually make it reliably work. And like, what do we do at this point? And the challenge is like, for a lot of these folks, it was like, basically you have to like strip everything out and start over again. And like, you're completely rewriting your product. And like, that obviously has a huge amount of cost. And so I'm wary of that. And like, on one hand, it's like exciting how much innovation is happening and how much the frontier is moving, which I think is like hopefully a net positive thing. But on the other hand, it's like, there's a bunch of work that's happening by humans who are putting in a lot of effort and time to like make things work around the previous iterations. And that work is definitely transitory. Like, it's not going to be the thing that sticks around. So it's tough. I don't know if that's like a great answer to your question or not, Matt, but it is like, I have a lot of empathy for teams that are going through this right now, because it is there's just like so much stuff happening. And again, hopefully the positive outcome is you end up being able to build a better product. And there is this interesting disconnect between, which is my final comment around this thread, which is, I think the innovation is happening, and sort of like for engineering teams and for people building products, it's like, it's not the gold rush, but it's like the gold rush of opportunity because there's so much cool stuff to be built. And then on the consumer side, at least, like the long tail of people who are actually customers, and maybe this is also somewhat inclusive of developers, though I think developers are like, because of the success of a bunch of these AI developer products, are a little bit more in tune with this, I think. There's this huge disconnect between like consumer awareness and what's actually possible with the models. So if you can sort of like build a product that is able to both bring consumers along or bring the long tail of users along, and also create a bunch of value around that, I think it's really there's a ton of like value arbitrage creation that you can do, which is exciting if you're building a business.
Yeah, it's been one thing so interesting too, just talking to companies. This might be oversimplifying, but I feel like if AI isn't really working for your company, it's worth $20 a month. And if it is working, it's worth thousands, and trying to bridge the gap. Because I think we're feeling right now that some companies are feeling the thousands a month, and that a lot of them are feeling the 20 a month, and just trying to figure out even how to structure the way you work and the teams. I was actually going to ask you about it. I think this kind of gets to it a little bit. I know that you all kind of straddled this a little bit with Gemini when it first came out, right? There's the pro version that was paid, and the experimental Gemini 2.5, and the experimental that was free. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about that, especially with, you probably saw some of the recent discourse around agentic coding being ad supported and free and things like that. I'm curious if you have thoughts on those two different forks, like the one where you're trying to get the most out of the models, you're paying top dollar, like even close to human engineer prices for it, versus the versions that are a little bit that are free and cheap and accessible. And I mean, it doesn't have to be from the Google or Gemini perspective, but just curious for your perspective on those two forks in the road, whether there is a middle ground that's worth considering.
Yeah. I think it depends on from whose perspective. I think as a user, like what I want is, and this has been like a principle for AI Studio, which is we actually give away a ton of compute. And the reason we give away a ton of compute is because we want to get you to that sort of aha moment where you're like, okay, I understand this is actually possible. And then at that point, and the challenge of this is we don't have a good way of quantifying what that moment is. Like I think for other products and platforms, like, Facebook had this thing initially where it was like, if you had 20 friends on Facebook, you were guaranteed to be a Facebook user for life or something like
magic moments. Yeah.
The magic moment. Like, I don't think we actually have what that metric is, though we have like a bunch of signals that perhaps influence us. And then at that moment, like, assuming the user has like the ability to like actually be a paid customer, like we want to get them into the paid funnel. Like it is both like, maybe I won't go as far to say like morally, but like it is like imperative that we get compute into the hands of people who like haven't yet had that aha moment with AI. And then if you have the means to actually like buy and be a paid customer, being able to do that. And it is, we're sort of, the interesting situation that Google is in with like the pricing stuff is we're making this, sort of decision, and there's this large ecosystem, and there's lots of other models, and so it is like it's a very different pricing situation than I think like individual products have to go through. Also because perhaps, it's a very interesting, complex situation. But yeah, I do think that like get people to the aha moment principle. And then at that point, like being able to monetize is like something that we've thought about from our team's perspective. And also there's some like interesting threads about like this outcome-based pricing as well. I mean, I think it's getting to your point about like pricing the models and the systems like close to what it would cost for a human engineer. The interesting thing is just like, can you actually scale up and parallelize? Because there is like a real, at that point, it's like, what is more efficient? And like, if you can't parallelize because actually the models and the systems require a lot of handholding and human intervention in order to get value out of them, then it's not clear to me like how valuable it is, or like how, I think for outcome-based pricing to work, you actually have to be able to parallelize to like get scale. Otherwise it doesn't seem super compelling to me.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. I think that's what we're thinking about for some of our upcoming offerings, to be honest. Um,
It's also hard
so
for people to make this transition mentally. I think like everyone's so used to like, oh, I'm paying per token or something like that. Or I'm paying $20 a month. This is like the great mistake, or maybe not even mistake, but the great like quarrel that I have with ChatGPT is that like you sort of, they arbitrarily, not super arbitrary, but like somewhat arbitrarily set $20 as the price point for all AI products, and then everyone else is like trying to, that dramatically inform the rest of the ecosystem, and then everyone has been like trying to make a product experience that's monetized that works at $20 a month, and like the ecosystem has dramatically changed over the last 2.5 years. The cost of compute is different. The cost of energy is different. The capability of AI products is different. So all of these things are completely different. And yet sort of we're all, the ecosystem is stuck with $20 being the entry price point, which is just like a very interesting situation for everyone to be in.
yeah. But Paige Bailey, by the way, said to say hi.
Hi, Paige.
And we have
Paige is the #1 Roo Code supporter. I feel like every conversation I ever have with Paige, she's like, she's hyping Roo Code. So I love it.
Thank you, Paige.
Well, here I put a question on screen. What does Google think about, this is from AI Code King, by the way. What does Google think about coding specific models? And can we ever see an open Gemma code model?
Yeah, that's a great question. On the Code Gemma model, something to think about. I'm not sure what the progress looks like there, but I can poke around and see if there's anything happening. Code specific model is definitely interesting. My point of view is there's so much positive capability transfer between these models that like you actually end up not getting to the global maxima by doing code specifically. Like there's lots of like, and also if you just think about like, what is the proxy of what's actually happening with code? There's like so much world understanding as an example that's required in order to build software. You're trying to like, again, in those one-shot examples I was doing in AI Studio before, like you actually have to have a mental model of like, how do people use software? How do they build software? How, what are the normal user journeys that people are going through? So there's all this like extra stuff that's baked in. And if you strip all of that out and you really focus on code, which I do think works, like code specific models for like autocomplete and other like very domain specific tasks, I think makes perfect sense. But if you want like a general LLM that's going to like be your, AI senior engineering sort of co-programmer, pair-programmer, I feel like the path is not building a bespoke coding model. I think there's just too many, you lose too much by going down that route.
No, that makes complete sense. And thank you. That's a very clear answer on that, because I've heard that question quite a number of times. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, there's also a limited amount of compute. So like you can only make a certain number of bets. And I think like Google's bet has always been like, let's build a really great general model that sort of works. And like we have a massive amount of customers across the ecosystem. So I think it's just like it splits focus, it splits attention. And I think it just doesn't end up being as good in the end.
Yeah. Huh. Well, this is a question. This is a general firing line question, I guess you could say. What are your thoughts on AGI? I mean, people always talk about this. I know that's a canned question, but is this happening? Are people getting too excited for nothing?
Yeah, this is a tough one because I think it's like such an interesting and now like overloaded conversation. I don't know if there's like what the other examples are. My sense is my sort of like only maybe not even nuanced take on this is that people are going to end up getting the sort of AGI experience from a product. Like they're going to end up using some either new product or iteration of an existing product and be like, oh no, for me, this thing is, artificial general intelligence. I think by like the standard definition, it has to be able to, or whoever's definition you use, do everything that's economically productive that humans do and not make all the sort of like simple mistakes that LLMs can do. But maybe there's actually this like difference in AGI versus like, I think we might actually get this like superhuman level product experience And I can imagine that happening for coding, given the progress of what's happening. And maybe the model isn't actually like generally intelligent enough to work in all these domains, but for code, it's like, 10x more capable than I'll ever be, and sort of parallelizable and all this other stuff. So you get this immense amount of like world value out of that, and yet still has like some of the faulty things that LLMs can't do, like counting the R's and strawberries. Maybe as a goofy example of that, just because of the like fundamental limits of tokenization and the whole model process. So it will be interesting to see like which of those happens first. Do you get these like superhuman capabilities, which I think is like kind of like roughly where we're trending towards relative to I think to get to artificial general intelligence, you need all these like fundamental research breakthroughs and things that have yet to happen, versus this like superhuman capability. I think there's almost like feel like there's more clarity that we'll be able to get to that point.
Yeah. Matt, I think you're up next on the question list.
We're doing the lightning round. Is there any other? Trying to look through the chat to see if there's any other questions that are not the same question. But all right, lightning round. Let's do that. What do you think we're going to be talking about in 2026 when it comes to AI?
Science.
Yeah, not coding.
Interesting. It's like scientific advancements.
Are you seeing some highlights that are really underpinning that intuition, or is it more broad intuition?
Yeah. I mean, I think we already are seeing some of this traction. I think we announced Co-Scientist at I/O last year, I believe, and like seeing a bunch of traction from that, which allows the model to sort of agentically go and confirm or do exploration about different scientific hypotheses. And then we just had the sort of new Gemma open weight model in collaboration with Yale, coming up with some potentially like novel cancer treatments and different literature, bringing a bunch of that together, which is really exciting. So I think that's going to continue to accelerate. And as the product experience continues to be built around this, as the models keep getting smarter, I think the like AI for science is the like promise of the technology. So I would expect lots of excitement in 2026, and I'm sure there'll be other stuff like hopefully coding as well. But as a developer, I hope there's lots of coding stuff, but I'm also excited for science.
That makes sense.
Do you think people are still going to be talking about vibe coding next year, or is that going to be a dirty word at that point?
Yeah. I mean, my sense is there's maybe a disconnect, and actually I think you see this across a lot of different examples between like what is the sort of like AI zeitgeist bubble group talking about versus like what is the value that's being created for the long tail of people. And I'm sure there's still a bunch of people who show up and use an AI chatbot for the first time. They're like, holy crap, this is incredible, and I never thought this experience would be possible, and it's so helpful and useful, and they're like blown away by that. And like everyone else has moved on to 10 other things. And I think the same thing will be true for vibe coding. I think the ability for anyone to create software is just like such an economically powerful force in the world, that, and like from a user perspective, and you can actually see this, and they like post the charts of like the number of users that Lovable and Bolt and everything else have. I mean, in absolute terms, it's not that many people. In relative terms, it's impressive how quickly these products have grown. But I think there's a huge market of folks who like have yet to have that aha moment with creating software. So I'm guessing 2026 will continue to be like lots of growth in that world. Plus, with the coding model getting better, it makes the aha moment even more sort of exhilarating.
Yeah, I find people often when they test the waters, they go to use a piece of software like Roo Code, and they open it up and they go, can it do this? And they type something and they go, oh, didn't do this. Because, they ask something beyond its capability, and they not just with Roo Code, with any piece of software. And I think a lot of people sort of test the waters from time to time, do something like that, and then they're like, I'm going to get back to work, before they really dig into how far it can go. So it is exciting to see with new models like Gemini 3 hitting the market soon enough, as hype would have us believe. Then, Roo is going to jump its abilities. I think we're doing that stepped growth. So we're very excited.
Yeah. And it is like particularly exciting because I think a lot of people just don't spend the time to like figure out the nuance of what these things can do. So if you have that bad first impression, then it's like you're like, this thing can't do anything. So I think nailing, like I'm somewhat skeptical of like models' ability to one-shot something as being like a great North Star. But I do think for like the initial step of a product experience, it matters a ton, because if you sort of don't get the first iteration right, like no one's going to stick around to like try 10 other times unless you have like a super high activation energy. So it is, yeah, I'm excited.
That's how I ended up with this job. Because I tried it and kept trying it. So
yeah, activation energy is an edge.
Well, for new developers, what's the single most common mistake that you think they make when they first try to adopt tools or model, coding with Gemini or other large models?
Yeah, my sense right now, and I need to sort of do some diligence on this perspective because it's not grounded in reality, I don't think, at the moment, or it's grounded in my intuition and maybe not data, but I think there's so much valuable stuff about like learning the process of building software, and as far as like how you think and from a resilience perspective and a bunch of other things. And when you the models are so eager to just to like give you the answer, and I think you actually lose some, like there's a cost to that, which is like you're not sort of coming to the, and I don't know if it was Simon Williamson or someone had a good blog post recently. I know that Jeremy Howard had a really interesting post. I'm on the like Fast AI email list, and I never read emails that aren't like personal emails, but he sent out this email, which is like, he's been frustrated by the like AI coding process because he doesn't have to do this problem solving that used to sort of give him this like aha dopamine hit when he would like fix the problem that he was having. And I think as a developer, like that's the thing that got me excited, was I was like, you sort of would painfully get through this process. You'd eventually figure the thing out and you were like, okay, that's so cool that I was able to make this thing work after, the code not running 25 times. So I think it'll be interesting to see how like a new generation of like developers grow up not going through that process, and perhaps because like AI tools are so good at getting them started. And I think that the flip side of this, of what's exciting, is that as a new developer, you oftentimes have to extend disbelief that you can actually build something useful or meaningful or interesting. And I remember like learning C++, and it was like extremely boring and not cool, and like we were just like doing coding for the sake of coding, and you couldn't actually build the thing that you wanted, which I think for a lot of people are like games or websites or whatever it is. And I think now with AI, you can see the aha moment really quick. I'm like, okay, I have the code on my computer now, it's running, I have this game working, I have this product working, like this is great. Now I can sort of believe that it's possible that I could learn how to do this and then sort of know how to wield these tools to do cool stuff. And I don't think that that was possible before. You sort of just had to like blindly trust that that was going to be possible. So that gets me excited on sort of the other hand of that equation.
We've got one more. Oh, go ahead. No.
I was gonna say, how much do you think that this enablement of people to build stuff is gonna kind of kick the issue down the road a little bit? Like, how much do you think we're going to be focused on review and feedback and trying to separate the slop from the not slop going forward?
I think this is one of the edges for tools to figure out. So I think you can actually really build, and this maybe comes to like where the outcome piece is like difficult, because I think you sort of have to self-select a cohort of people who actually want that. Because I think a lot of people just like want the answer and they don't want to go down this journey. But like ultimately, that's perhaps to your detriment, depending on sort of what worldview you take. So I do think like there is a world where if you build this product experience that is like, and our team has thought about this as well, that doesn't just build software for you, but sort of helps you through the process of learning what it is required to build software and how to think about building software and all this. I think there's something really interesting there, and no one is doing that right now. So I'm excited about, again, I don't know how it's a lot of
onboard someone into that.
Yeah. And also like how you capture value from doing that, which is the other thing. Like, I don't know if that's just like another, basically the value capture is you replace like a CS education because your product that helps people write code is also educating them about CS. But like, I don't know I haven't thought deeply about it.
I have one last question here. Somebody asked, please ask Logan this question. Why did you decide to work with Google DeepMind and not other labs? What makes DeepMind special?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think today my worldview, when I joined Google, I sort of had less context, and I've sort of like learned more about DeepMind and Google as time has gone on. I think today what sort of my perspective of what makes DeepMind special is I think this like legacy, both of like who created DeepMind, but like who leads DeepMind from a day to day today, and with Demis and Koray and others. Like they truly are scientists, which is really interesting. Like Demis is a Nobel laureate scientist, and I think the way in which he shows up in the world and his worldview and what we prioritize, I think is like grounded in that scientific perspective. And I think that's a very interesting and different way than lots of other folks are looking at solving these problems. And like Demis, like, I don't know if folks have watched The Thinking Game before, which is sort of like a story of the origins of DeepMind and about Demis's life. But like, it's an incredibly interesting story, and I think gives me even more conviction every time I see a clip from it or something like that, that DeepMind is going to be a place where we create AGI and do it in a way that actually benefits all of humanity. And I think practically for me, when I joined DeepMind and Google, the exciting thing was this opportunity to like go from 0 to 1 to like help build a developer platform. And we didn't sort of have a robust API or momentum or developer stuff when I joined Google a little over a year and a half ago, and getting to sort of go through that experience. I love the sort of like early stages of building something. And so, yeah, it's been a ton of fun to do that.
Well, we are at time. Thank you very much for joining us, Logan, and thank you to the community for joining us once again, and we'll see you next week. Have a great rest of the week.
This was fun.
Thanks, Logan.
And it's ending.